Hi there, everybody. My name is Shawan Sanhan, and I'll be giving you a quick presentation on how to prepare for the MCAT with a little guide on everything you need to know to prepare to start preparing. First off, for a little bit on what the MCAT is. The MCAT is an extremely long exam for medical school admissions. It requires a total seated time of 7.5 hours, with about 6.25 of those hours actually being for testing. It's broken down into four sections. First off, you have the chemistry and physics section. It takes 95 minutes at max with a 10-minute break afterwards. It's followed by CARS, the critical analysis and reasoning skills section, which is about 90 minutes with a 30-minute break after. This section is a little bit more atypical. It has a lot of more liberal arts focused passages, and will largely rely on your intuition to tease out answers related to reading comprehension and critical thinking about those passages. This is then followed by a biology and biochemistry section that's about 95 minutes with a 10-minute break after, and finally a psych-soc section, which is 95 minutes. In total, the test is 230 questions and is very time sensitive. The MCAT is scored on a pretty wide range from 472 to 528, with section scores ranging from 118 to 132 points. The average on the MCAT is always normalized to be a 500 or a 501, depending on the test, with students that score in the 75th percentile for any given test falling into the 508 or 509 point range, 90th percentile 515, and 99th percentile 522 to a 523. There's no penalty for wrong answers on the MCAT, so you should always make sure you fill out every question. And the average matriculant score, so the average score that people actually entering med school in MD, granting med schools in the US, with is 511.7 points. Before you get into the MCAT preparation, you should really know what you're getting into and make sure you have the time for it. A lot of people really jump into this exam without really knowing how much it's going to take and how much time they should uh, allot to it really every day leading up. It covers roughly 5 to 6 semesters worth of content, so it really does take a lot of time and effort to prep and remember all of that information at once. Your prep time should probably range from 3 to 6 months, depending on how intensely you're preparing every day. And so you're really having to cram that in a short amount of time. You really want to make sure you're leaving a good portion of your day each day to prepare for it. Also, because there is such a long testing time, you really actually need to work on your mental stamina most of the time. Some students may not have as much of a problem with this as others, but it is a major aspect of this test being able to remain focused for that long in general. This is likely the hardest test most students take in their undergraduate career, given both the length and difficulty of questions, and it will pretty much dominate your life for the duration of studying, and you should just be prepared for that going in. You should know this is going to be your main thing. So really, I just want to emphasize, don't go into this half-heartedly or without the proper time to commit to it. Really make sure this is what you want to do at that point. One thing I really do want to stress is signing up for the MCAT is actually becoming kind of difficult. You do want to make sure you're there to get your test time right when the availability for picking a testing date opens. It's actually quite hard to get a testing center on your ideal day in your ideal location most of the time. Also, picking your day is very important. When you're choosing your MCAT testing day, you really want to make sure you don't have a lot going on in about the month coming up to it. And you really want to have backup times and locations in case your location and ideal day or time is taken. You really do want to think about this pretty far in advance. And you want to have a pretty clear prep schedule before you sign up for the MCAT. You really want to think, what do you have going around that time for about 3 to 6 months before? How long do you want to prepare for? Are you going for a quicker 3 month preparation session or a longer 6 month preparation session? You also want to think when you're applying to medical school, making sure you're getting out of the MCAT with ample time then before the application cycle, especially if you do need to retake the MCAT, as many students do. Um, you want to make sure that if you are in school, you don't have too rough a semester, that you're going to be able to, uh, put that time towards it. And you really should also leave time on the back end of the day you pick in case you do want to reschedule your MCAT because you get to there and you're just not as far along on prep as you hope to be, which happens to a lot of students. Practically every student that I have seen that is preparing for the MCAT has fallen behind at some point or the other and is behind for a large portion of their preparation. And that's okay. You just need to be ready to adapt to it. And if that means pushing your test date back, you should be ready for that as well. Um, and the last thing I'm going to say is really make sure that for the 3 to 6 months leading up to it, you're building your schedule around being able to have this time. Like I said, this should be really your most major commitment aside from school in general. As far as how to actually prepare, there's a lot of routes to prepare well for the MCAT. There's plenty of free and paid resources that I'll go through now. And finding a combination of resources that works well with your budget and time frame is important. A lot of courses will work in a certain time frame, and if you're buying a paid course, you're going to want to make sure you're fully able to take advantage of it in that time frame. They are quite expensive. Um, and so if you're going that route, you really want to make sure that your testing date lines up with that. And if you're not going that route, you really do want to make sure you're self motivated enough to keep up with all of the demands and an aggressive schedule for preparing for the exam as well. First off, to go over the free resources, there's Khan Academy um, as the first one. That's pretty much the basic one that everyone's going to point you to when you look at free MCAT resources. Khan Academy has a good amount of practice questions and some good content review videos for the MCAT, and they can really be helpful. But most people don't really find them comprehensive enough to use as their sole mode for prep. And so I'd really shy away from that. It's great supplementally, however. And practice questions are really the name of the game once you get down to it. Once you're done with content review, that's how you improve your score. So, great resource for that, and definitely something to keep in mind. The one I really want to highlight here is the free AAMC content. Any content that you get from the AAMC on the MCAT is the gold standard. That is what you want to prep around. The AAMC is the group that puts on the MCAT. They're the group that makes the MCAT. They're the group that can make the most accurate questions. And so they really are the name of the game. They have a free pack of sample questions and one practice test for free, and you should 100% be using those, no doubt, no matter who you are. They also have some paid resources that I'll get into in a second that I would highly recommend buying. I would say if there is a must buy for the MCAT, it would be the AAMC content. It's just the most accurate. It's what everybody goes to make sure like this is what I'm going to score on test day. And that's really what you want to look at. Another great free resource that you'll hear everybody talk about is Anki. Anki is a flashcard deck uh, program. Essentially, you can create these flashcard decks, you can create sub decks, and using those decks, you're able to combine them, sort them in different ways to show different sides of the cards first, use image occlusion, which means you're putting up an image and then covering parts of the image using a program, and then essentially when you go through you can practice pointing out different parts of the image to label. It's really useful for visualizing stuff. Anki as a whole is very customizable and it has a lot of decks that go with it that are very useful. For example, you can download pretty much any deck that people make publicly available, and if you go to the MCAT Reddit, there's a lot of really great publicly available decks. I would really vet the ones you use. You want to make sure what you use is reliable. One deck that I've heard really good results from is the Jack Sparrow deck. I've heard it's very comprehensive and covers a lot of even really basic stuff. If anything, it covers too much, is what people say. But in my opinion, that's a pretty good problem to have so long as you can get through all the content. And so, so long as you're really keeping up with the rigorous style of that deck, it's very useful. The Miles Down deck, another very useful deck. They have a particularly great Psych Soc section that I used. And I'd really recommend that deck as well if that's one you want to look at. Anki also really uses a feature that's very useful for the MCAT, which is um, it spaces out your flashcards and gives you them back to review within whether a 3 day, 4 day, 6 day, or 27-day period, depending on what intervals you set. So when you finish a flashcard, you'll give it a strength rating. And based on that strength rating, it'll give it back to you within a certain amount of time. So it's a really useful feature for the MCAT, especially because it helps you keep all of that content that you're really cramming into your brain in there, actively thought about, and bringing it back up, getting that spaced repetition really will help you make sure you still remember that stuff when it comes to test day that you studied 3 months before. So really cannot stress this enough. Anki is almost considered an essential for prepping for the MCAT for that reason. Reddit is another good resource. I'd use it with caution, obviously. The stuff that's on there is not necessarily policed for accuracy, so you don't always want to use it. But like I said, there's some great decks on there. If you do police the resources like the Miles Down deck and the Jack Sparrow deck that you can use with Anki, that I would really recommend, at least for certain sections if you feel you have a deficiency in a certain section. The last free resource that I'll let people know about is the Princeton Reviews content and practice tests that they'll give you. The Princeton Review will give you a whole bunch of resources, including practice questions, practice tests, and practice books to look at the content, do the content review. Pretty much you'd have a lot of what you would need, if not everything you would need to prepare. But you do need a college email to do this, and you do have to agree to send your scores to the Princeton Review before and after the exam, so your diagnostic score and your end score to see what the increase is so that they can use that data as well. But I think it's a really great program. I think a lot of people used it, and it really is worth looking into. As far as paid courses and content goes, there's a lot out there, and it's all really expensive. So I would be very careful with what you buy and vet what you buy before you buy it. Now, like I said, there's all this AAMC content. FLE stands for full length exam. Um, so there's four more full length exams: a question bank, a section bank, a guide to the MCAT, and a CARS diagnostic tool available through the AAMC. These are all incredibly useful, and I would highly recommend using most, if not all of these to their fullest extent. Um, the FLEs provided by the AAMC, like I said before, are the gold standard. They're the most accurate you're going to get on tests, and they're really what you want to stick to. And so you want to use those actually really close to your testing date, like maybe one a week leading up to your testing date to get an idea of where you're at. And then after, throughout that week, you're just kind of reviewing those tests maybe the day after. Um, that CARS diagnostic tool is also something that I really want to point you guys to. I'm going to get more into the section specifically later, but CARS is a section that gives a lot of people a lot of trouble because it's very hard to improve it. It's kind of reading comprehension based and also relies a lot on people's intuition. And if your intuition isn't particularly honed for the CARS section, then you can have a lot of trouble with it. But the CARS diagnostic tool is a really useful tool that the AAMC made to try and help people increase their CARS score, hone in their logic in the ways that the MCAT really wants to see. And so if you're having trouble with CARS, it's really a fantastic tool to improve your score and really snag a few extra points, because a few points on the MCAT makes a huge difference, especially when you're near the end of preparing and getting those score increases is just getting harder and harder. Another great place to get content from is Altius. Altius has courses. They also have an ability to buy their practice tests or their question banks. I think that Altius has really great practice tests. They're considered pretty good. Their psych soc might be a little off here or there, is kind of the general consensus in a lot of cases. But overall, they have very accurate tests. They're not, nothing's going to be as accurate as the AAMC. Everything else, what people call third party exams, are never going to quite live up to that. But Altius does a pretty good shot at it. And so they're great for looking for some other practice tests to practice with. Practice tests in general are also considered very useful and something you should not waste. Every time you're sitting down to take a practice test, you should be taking that full practice test as if it were the MCAT. You should be waking up on time for test day. You should be making yourself breakfast like on test day. You should be sitting down for that exam like on test day, and you should be taking breaks like on test day. And that's going to get you the best improvement in your results and also the most accurate practice, especially with how limited and how expensive these practice tests can be. Kaplan, Princeton, and Blueprint are also all sources you can go and buy courses from. I've heard a lot of success with each of these as well. I know that Blueprint has a self-paced course that students tend to really like. And all of those are worth looking into. I know that those can be considered to have much harder practice tests in general, which some people like, but some people dislike as it discourages them and pushes them a little bit further away from being as confident as they should be on test day, which also has a lot to play into it. You can also buy the content separately from all of these places if you're not trying to buy a whole course, which is also a great idea. Um, it's much less expensive, and if you're self-motivated, it really can be a great option. Another great resource is the UWorld question bank. UWorld is a great resource, massive question bank, timed questions and passages. And so if you're really looking for extra content to beef up in that last month after you're done with your core content review, that's a great place to look. Now for your time frame. Looking into studying for the MCAT starts with picking your test date and picking how long you're looking to study and how hard. Now, if you're studying for about 3 months prior, you're probably going to have to study full time. That's kind of the consideration. You should be putting in at least 5 hours a day near the beginning, closer to 8, especially once you're getting into that last 4 to 6 weeks until test day, because you really want to make sure you're getting through all of that content with ample time to then just practice questions and practice questions until you're confident you're going to get the score that you want on test day. 6 months is a longer testing period. In that, people recommend you can study part-time. You can kind of layer it with school a little bit more. It's a little bit more feasible. Obviously, you can also go anywhere along that gradient, depending on how hard you want to study. Now, an important note is some people will say, yeah, you can study for 8 months. I think that the general consensus and what I've seen the most success with is not studying for more than 6 months. Once you're studying more than that, a lot of people complain that they've started to forget content, they didn't study fast enough, and now they're not really able to maintain all of that going into test day. So that's also something I would really watch out for. It's a pitfall a lot of people fall into, and then they get really sad because they spent so much time preparing and weren't able to capitalize. For that last 4 to 6 weeks, I can't emphasize this enough. Prepare to live and breathe the MCAT. It is your job, and you will have to take it that seriously if you're really trying to push for an extremely competitive score. Um, you want to complete your content review about 1 to 2 months earlier than that so you can live and breathe just taking tests under time, under pressure, under test day conditions over and over again, and then looking over those tests really rigorously, reading those passages really deeply, annotating them, practicing your annotating, practicing your timing, practicing ruling out answers, noticing the tricks the MCAT likes to pull, and noticing the commonalities between questions. Um, and let's say you aren't finished with content review 1 to 2 months early, that's when I would start looking into pushing the test back. Now, you kind of want to avoid it where you can. It's very difficult to then kind of reschedule things, but you shouldn't be close to the idea. If you need to move it back so that you don't push it too early and get a score that you're not happy with, then feel free to push it back. You shouldn't be too scared of the prospect. Um, but most importantly, I think what the main thing is with this time frame is you have to be prepared to adapt. You have to be prepared to fall behind because life happens at some point in that 3 months, and you have to be prepared to buckle down to then get back on track. And if you're not doing that, then it's going to be really hard for you to get ready by test day. So this timing thing is actually a major part of how you should prepare for the MCAT and how you should build your plan to prepare for the MCAT. There's no one size fits all. You just kind of have to see what's going on in your life and adapt accordingly based on this. Now, some tips for reviewing in general. First, before you get into this, consider why you're doing all the work in the first place. There are a lot of people who start getting into studying for the MCAT and actually stop being pre-med or drop from the whole program in general because they just weren't confident that this is what they wanted to do and the sacrifice they wanted to put in. This is one of the first major roadblocks that I feel students encounter, and it's one of the things that push people away from being pre-med or on the medical track. So really consider, is this what I want to do? Don't take insult to the idea. Just sit down and really think about it because there is some sacrifice that's involved here. Next, you want to make sure you're studying a set amount of hours each day for different phases of studying. Um, like I said earlier on, you might get away with 4 or 5 hours if you're taking a 3 month route, but towards the end, you're really going to be wanting to sit down for 8 hours minimum, likely or 10 to 12 a day. Make sure while you're still doing that, you're also building in time for hobbies. Otherwise, you're going to go a little stir crazy. Everybody needs to let loose, everybody needs healthy outlets. Make some time for the gym, make some time for a run, make some time for some healthy outlets that work in constructive ways to get you back, get you re energized, and get you back into it. Because avoiding burnout is a major part of this process. Make sure you're marking your score increases. That really does help motivate you. Seeing that 2 to 3 point jump in just a couple weeks or even in just a week towards that end phase where you're just trying to push up that score by practicing questions, those really do motivate you and they really help you. It also helps you track your progress and tell if you're going to be ready by test day with your goal score. Another tip that I found really useful was don't study just one section at a time. Don't say, hey, I'm going to study for 5 months and I'm going to do one section each month and then take 2 months at the end because you don't have to study for cars to go do these practice questions. It can work and it does work for a lot of people, and it's something you totally can do. But if I'm going to be honest, what I've personally enjoyed and what a lot of my friends enjoyed was breaking each section up into subsections and then maybe saying, okay, I'm going to study Chem Phys block one, then Bio block one, and then Psych Soc block one, and then move into block two and block three of each. And that way, you're avoiding burnout on specific topics and you're bringing back up their associated topics regularly. So let's say you come back to Chem Phys part two. When you're studying Chem Phys part two, you're bound to see stuff from Chem Phys part one. And that's going to start reinforcing that with spaced repetition, like I said, really keeping that in your brain for test day. Spaced repetition is a big part of this process. You don't want to forget what you know. You've studied it, you've put in the work. Losing that information is extremely painful. Now, setting goals is incredibly important here. You want to set short-term goals and long-term goals. Some short-term goals you can set are like the number of Anki cards you want to get through a day, right? Anki's got new cards and it's got review cards. The review cards are the ones it's pushing back to you with spaced repetition. The new cards are the new cards that you need to get through and the new content you need to get through. Set a number of new cards and then make sure you're getting through all your review cards each day. That'll prevent you from falling behind on your review cards, which is how a lot of students fall behind, and it'll also keep you going at your new cards at a good pace. Now, once you're moving on to questions or moving a little bit away from content into practicing some questions, so you're getting some practical applications of that, make sure that you're also including a number of practice questions or a number of sets a day. Another important goal is maybe weekly content and question goals. So like I said, maybe you have one day where something comes up, your grandparents come to visit. I don't know, a million things could happen. A million things do happen. It's life. But you need to be able to adapt the next day. So a weekly goal kind of helps you then stick to that and rebound in a way that gets you back on track. Setting some more long-term goals are also really important, so you make sure you're where you want to be at by test day, and you know where you want to be at in general. So first off, easy one, make sure you know when you want to finish content review and begin practicing. Like I said, about 6 weeks before, maybe 4 weeks, start taking 1 to 2 tests a week and start kind of getting into that more testing mind frame as opposed to content review or reading mind frame. You also want to learn when you're going to start integrating more practice questions that can come before you start moving into that full length question phase. Like I said, maybe towards the end of your content review, you want to start putting on that practical application in block 3 of Chem Phys, for example. And then the third one, make sure you have a goal score. You want to know what you're aiming for. If you don't know what you're aiming for, you can't work towards it. You also want to know the time frames you need to hit certain scores by to get there. For example, where your score really increases are really going to come are in that last month. Maybe map out where you want to be week by week on each test, and that'll really help you. Finding your timing is really important in actually getting through these questions. Timing is one of the major aspects of the MCAT, both in how long it is and also in how unfortunately short it is, because you have to fly through these questions. They also mostly come with these very large, dense reading passages that are taken from research papers. Those are not easy to read at first. You're going to need to practice reading them. You're going to need to practice how you break them down and annotate them. And you're going to need to practice how you like taking time per question and per passage. Now, some people can get through a passage in 2 to 3 minutes and then take a minute per question. Some people need longer and then shorter per question. It just depends on you, and you should try and hone in and find the timing you're comfortable with a little bit early on, maybe near your diagnostics, and then again early on in your testing phase, because that's likely going to change as you do content review and get more familiar with the words you're reading. Make sure you're taking full advantage of your practice materials. I can't emphasize this enough. Every single question you do, look through every single wrong answer. Figure out why they're wrong answers. Figure out the tricks and why they're tricks and what common tricks the MCAT likes to play. Underline your knots, the negatives in the sentences. Pick up on those. Make sure you're just not cheating yourself when you're going back through the exam and you have all the time in the world. Look at every aspect of it. Every aspect of it is meticulously made. Every aspect of it can help you. And the harder you look into it, the more good you're doing yourself. You paid a lot for those practice exams. Take advantage of them. You make sure also when you're taking the full lengths, you're clearing out the entire day, like I said. And another great way to live over it is to use spreadsheets to track the types of mistakes you make. For example, everybody knows the silly mistake, oh, I just added wrong, or oh, I just read that wrong. I missed the not. But track how often you're making that mistake and track how often you're making content mistakes. And if it is a content mistake, note the type of content and see if you have a certain weakness, maybe an organic chem. That's a very common weakness for people. The synthesis pathways can be very difficult and arduous questions for people. So if you're having trouble with those, you want to know that so you can practice that. Using a spreadsheet is a great way to do this. It's also a great way to pick up on a common accidental mistake where you're just losing easy points where you shouldn't be. For example, like I said, missing knots, one of the most common mistakes people make on the MCAT, but it happens. People are stressed, people are trying to move quick. So make sure you're noting that, make sure you're taking full advantage there. Trying to increase your score in each section can be a little different per section. So I'm just going to give a quick breakdown on each, and then I'll just shore us up with a quick note at the end. Now, first off, looking at Chem Phys, you want to make sure that you're using targeted content review to shore up gaps in your knowledge. That's a very knowledge-heavy section. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, you don't a lot of the time. So make sure you're watching your time, practicing under time constraints, and when you find out what you get wrong, you're shoring up on the gaps because there's bound to be a gap or two. Now for BB, it's a very similar game. Again, a very content-heavy section. You're going to try and prep for it in a very similar way. So it's nice that there's at least those similarities there you can draw and kind of attack in a similar way. Now here is where we get a little bit funkier. Cars is the bane of some students. Some people just really get it and they're really lucky, but some people just have a really hard time with it and they have to stick it through and learn this new logic in a sense. Practicing under time constraints is huge. It's one of the big factors in cars. It's very hard to get through these passages that are largely unfamiliar to STEM majors. And so what you really want to do is practice under those time constraints and hone your intuition because a lot of them might be judgment based or critical reasoning based. They usually are. And a lot of this is going to be, in a sense, an intuition you gain, and you get that intuition from practice. So if you're having trouble with cars, the name of the game is practice, practice under ideal test conditions, and just hammer it. Do 3 CARPS passages a day, practice reading them, practice speed drills. You can even practice reading them faster as fast as you can, and then reading them as slow as you can. And when you're reading them as slow as you can, fully dissect it and pick out what you find important in passages generally. And when you're going fast, figure out what you're missing when you go back, when you go slow. Psych Soc, kind of a similar game. It's a little bit of a mix now between the CPBB way of studying and the CARS way of studying. There is a sense of intuition in Psych Soc, but there's also a massive amount of content. It's probably the broadest of all of the categories, and so you can really pull on a lot of different stuff. So you want to make sure you're getting that targeted content review in whenever you find something you're missing, and you also want to make sure you're kind of honing that intuition for that critical reasoning aspect that's really present in the Psych Soc section. The last thing I'll leave you with is on test day, you don't want any surprises. That's the name of the game. You're going in to prepare as hard as you can so you've seen every trick in the book. You're going in to prepare as hard as you can so there's no words that surprise you or no content that surprises you, even though they will inevitably throw in content that they know you probably don't know because they want you to reason it out with some word roots. But the main thing you're trying to do is be as comfortable as you can be on test day. And that comes with looking at test day videos for your testing center prior to testing, familiarizing yourself with the path you're going to take, even going to the test center a day before. That's what I did. I went there a day before. I just stood outside, took a look, just so I knew the building. I knew where to go. I knew where to go in. I knew what to do. Prepare a lunch. Prepare a lunch you like. You want to be happy, you want to be in a good mood, and you want to be well fed. Include caffeine if you use it, don't if you don't. You really want to be in the state that you're testing at with a practice test so that you get a reliable outcome. Also, don't be surprised, there is a fingerprint scan and an ID check every time you want to leave and enter the room. That's just so that there is a very secure testing environment. They will be watching you quite intensely, and so really be prepared for that. It's a pretty tense testing environment. Also, there's a locker for use during breaks. Just make sure you know about that. Make sure you know that you can put your stuff in there. You can take it out during breaks, get a quick snack, get a quick drink of water, the likes. Beyond that, that's really everything you need to know to start preparing to prepare. You know, putting together this plan beforehand is really important, and being adaptable with this plan as you're going is also really important. So please just keep that in mind, stay calm, and stay positive. It's a very hard test, but if you really put in the work, anyone can do it. Good luck.